Hello again and welcome. As you probably know, my name is Dr. Ashibi Jacob Ineji, your course facilitator for CSS848, Principles of Security Practice and Management. I will be taking you on this instructional video. It promises to be an interesting one, and so I encourage you to pay attention as I commence the presentation. Cheers. Alright, so the course code again is CSS848 and the title is Principles of Security Management, Security Practice and Management. Without wasting much time, let me take you straight into the topic of this lesson. We'll be looking into the meaning of security on the one hand, and also on intellectual discourse on violence and violent crimes. All right, so these are what we will be dealing with or dealing on this lesson. All right, so let's proceed straight on to the intended learning outcomes. What will be your home take after the end of this lesson? Let's look at them. Now, the first one is that by the end of this lesson, you should be able to define the concept of security. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to define the concept of security, and as well, you should be able to explain the types of security. All right, there are different types of security, so you will get to know about that, and of course, you should be able to master them and explain them. You should also be able to define the term violence. Violence, just like you're able to define security, you should be able to define the term violence, and identify and discuss the factors that justify acts of violence. Now, acts of violence or violence can actually be used, but there are conditions that justifies the use of violence. So we are going to be looking at that, and of course, you should be able to identify and discuss those factors. Again, at the end of the lecture, you should be able to list and discuss effectively the forms of violence, all right? Different forms of violence or violent crimes, all right? There are different types of violent crimes. So by the end of the lectures, you should be able to list and discuss them effectively. All right, having taken the intended learning outcomes, let's move on straight into the meaning of security. Let's define the term security as it applies contextually. Now, several definitions exist for the term security, but then we will just speak those key terms. As you can see here, what is security? What is the meaning of security? Security actually entails that it's a state where people live in freedom, absolute freedom, all right? Peace and safety. That is a key word. It entails a situation or a state where people or individuals live in freedom, peace, and safety, and participating fully in the process of governance while enjoying the protection of fundamental rights, access to resources, and the basic necessities of life. And finally, a state where individuals inhabit a conducive environment. Okay, so this actually captures the core elements, the critical element in the definition of security. All right, so if you're asked to define security, you want to integrate all of these elements into your definition. A state or a situation where individuals live in freedom, peace, and safety, can participate fully in the process of governance while enjoying the protection of fundamental rights, access to resources, and the basic necessities of life, and finally inhabiting a conducive environment. This is when you can actually say there is a state of security. All right, so this definition is actually captured in the South Africa White Paper on Defense in 1996, and it is the most acceptable definition of security. Now let's move on to the types of security. There are different types of security. As you can see here, we have food security, health security, economic security, environmental security, personal security, community security, territorial security. This is some of the types of security. So we are quickly going to take them one after the other just to explain in brief what they actually means. Right, food security. Let's see what we have here. Food security means a state or of which an individual, a community, a state, or the nation is self-sustaining, has that self-sustenance or self-sustainability in food production. All right. So a nation can be said to have food security when it can actually produce what it consumes. All right. Where a nation or an individual is heavily dependent on external sources for food, such nation is not secured. All right, such nation is not secured with regards to food. So every nation, every individual must strive to produce what they eat. All right, let's take the next one, health security. Now, health security is safety against diseases that accounts for high mortality rate. What is mortality rate? High death rate. All right, high death rate. Now, when we have health security, it means we are able to resist those diseases or ailments that causes high death rate. Examples of such ailments are HIV/AIDS, even though it has been contained. The most recent is the COVID-19 pandemic, all right, that caused a lot of high death rate. Malaria is also not left out, etc. Now, it is only when these diseases that causes high death rates are contained that we can now say we have health security. Where there is no measure taken to contain this type of pandemics, diseases that causes high death rate, and the mortality rate is high, then we are in a state of health insecurity. All right, health insecurity. In summary, health security entails safety against diseases that accounts for high mortality rate or high death rate. All right, how about economic security? Economic security. Economic security. It is a state where there is access to employment and a living wage. Access to employment and a living wage. Responsible government. In climes where there are responsible governments, there is economic security. All right. Where individuals are jobless, all right, where individuals are jobless or have nothing to do to earn a living, in order to guarantee economic security, governments usually provide some social security platforms for citizens, for such citizens to benefit. All right, at the end of the month, or according to how it is structured, those individuals who are out of jobs or who are jobless cannot earn a living are provided with some living entitlements or social welfare for them to be able to keep life going. All right. So in order to guarantee economic security, individuals must be employed and have access to a living wage. Okay. The absence of it is economic insecurity. Okay, let's move on to the next one, environmental security. Environmental security. For individuals to live securely, they must be cohabiting in a conducive environment that is not detrimental to their health and well-being. Okay, so the environment must be healthy, not detrimental to health and well-being. That is when you can say you have environmental security. An environment that is heavily polluted, it is not secured. All right. Okay, let's take on the next one, personal security. This is quite an easy one. It is the protection from physical violence. Protection from physical violence. Individuals most times protect themselves. All right, you have some weapons around yourself to ensure that you are not harmed physically by other individuals on rascality. Okay, Personal security is one's protection against physical violence. One's protection against physical violence. The state also owes individuals the responsibility of personal security by providing security for life and property. Okay, so like police officers are out there on the street to ensure that you are very secure from physical violence. All right, let's move on to the next one, which is community security. Okay, I think I left those two. Okay, I'm going to leave community security and territorial security for you to conduct a self-study. All right, community security and territorial security. Now, I'm going to also pause the video for you to cache this class activity one. We have two class activities. This is the first one, so you can write down the questions and attempt them on your own. Ensure you do this in order to master the crux of this lesson. Okay, so I'll pause the video right now. Alright, so I now believe that you have gotten the questions, the class activity. So we will now quickly move on to the next aspect of this lesson, which is the definition of violence, discuss on violence and violent crimes. So what is violence? Several definitions actually exist for the term violence. Alright, many scholars have actually defined the term violence. As you can see in this image here, somebody actually received a punch, okay, a punch right there on the jaw, which of course could cause some physical harm. All right, now in the definition of violence, we'll just take a few so you can know the words that are consistent, that have been repeated over and over. So whenever you're asked to define the term violence, you'll be able to also impute those words in your definition. Now, according to Arendt, 1968, page 4, she actually looked into the characteristics of violence. She said violence interprets itself basically through the way it happens within itself, an element of arbitrariness. Arbitrariness, the use of intrusion, of the utterly unexpected. All right, for instance, like this guy here was not expecting this punch. All right, so it's unexpected and also arbitrary. In simple terms, violence is the action taken to forcefully, all right, coerce support from a group. To forcefully coerce support from a group. All right, let's look into other definitions. The definition from the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Violence actually entails injury. Right, this is a key word there. Inflicted by deliberate means, which includes assaults as well as self-harm. Right, so self-harm here, that means an individual can actually go violent on himself or herself. Okay, so it doesn't mean it must come from other person. People actually can be violent with themselves. Okay, so you take the keyword injury, assault. There's also deliberate, but I have not really highlighted that. It's usually deliberate effort, all right, to instill harm or physical injury on others. Okay, so these are the key terms. All right, so let's look at more definitions. The definition by Baron, 1997. Baron defines definition as any form of behavior directed towards the goal of harming, you can see that's a key word there, or injuring another living being who is motivated to avoid such treatment. Of course, the other individual, in this case, not yourself, is motivated not to be harmed or to avoid violence, but then some other individuals are have that behavior directed towards him or her of harming or injuring. Okay, the action of harming or injuring anyone is an act of violence. Okay, so by Baron, violence entails any form of behavior directed towards the goal of harming or injuring another living being, that's another individual, who is motivated to avoid such treatment. Okay. All right. I think I still have another definition. Let's look at that very quickly. Now, this definition was reported on Violence and Health in 2002. 2002. And the definition is the intentional, remember we mentioned the word deliberate, so this is another similar word, it's a synonym. Intentional use of physical force or power, threatened or actual, against oneself, all right, another person, or against a group or community, that either results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, maldevelopment, or deprivation. I love this definition so much. It is all encompassing. All right, it's all encompassing. So you can look at those. Keep this very close to yourself. It is an all encompassing definition with the keywords intentional, force, power, threatening against oneself, another. All right, so it covers everything, or against a group or community, that either results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, maldevelopment, or deprivation. This is a good definition for the term violence, right? Okay, so let's take possibly a final definition, just a brief one, so we can now move on with the next aspect of this lesson. Violence is aggressive behavior that may be physically, sexually, or emotionally abusive. All right. This is brief but very powerful definition. Violence is aggressive. Of course, it's triggered by anger. Aggressive behavior that may be physically, sexually, or emotionally. All right. It is not only physical harm that is constituted or categorized as a violent harm, a violent act. Violence can also be sexual, it can also be emotional, right? So we'll get to see the different forms of violence, all right? Okay, so before we get to that, let's look into the justification of use of violence by individuals. When are individuals allowed to go violent or to take on the tools of violence? Now, on self-defense, this is one of it. Self-defense, for instance, an individual standing calm and gentle, observe a group of 4 persons heavily armed coming to him or her to attack him, and that individual has a gun. An individual pulls out the gun and triggers the shot, killing all 4 individuals coming to attack him or her. That act is on self-defense. All right, it's on self-defense, and so that individual has a good reason for killing all 4 individuals that were to harm him or her. Okay, so that is one reason. Another reason is on mental state. The mental state of the individual as at the time the crime is committed. If an individual kills another on a poor mental state, all right, it is usually admissible in court that the individual was not mentally sound enough to have decided on the right course of action. But of course, the mental state has to undergo some psychiatric examinations in order to ascertain that the individual was not in a good mental state as at the time the crime was committed. Okay. Now, repressive governance, a government that is not listening or does not conform or does not respect the fundamental rights of each subject, may end up giving the individuals enough reasons to toe the line of violence, right? So when government does not respect the fundamental rights, fundamental human rights of her citizens, such government may be given enough reason to the citizens to perpetrate violence. Okay, so finally, we have government violation of social contract. Every government in power is entrusted to execute the social contract of the people they have held with the people. Right. So when government begins to deviate from the initial manifestos or promises and agreement before they are voted into power, People may toe the line of violence in order to resist such a government, and of course, it is admissible in court. Right? So these are four key reasons why individuals may toe the line of violence. All right, but then again, violence is always advisable to be the last resort, for individuals to take in order to act. All right. Okay. This also has actually created a balance here. This scale of justice that I have presented here is to create a balance that between government, all right, and individuals. That government has to be on the right path in order not to trigger violence from the individuals. Okay, and as well, individuals also uh, have to be of good behavior in order not to trigger violence from the government. Remember, government has enough right to own violence, to use violence, to enforce policies on the individuals when the individuals are acting out of the law. All right, let's move on. Let's look at the forms of violence. There are different forms of violence, so we'll take them one after the other. First one is before we even go to that, let's look at the what actually is violent crimes before we look at the forms of violence. So let's define the term violent crimes. Violent crimes are simply defined as aggressive actions that are outlawed or prohibited by the law. Okay, they can be classified into domestic and non-domestic. Domestic violence are those that happens within a household, all right, domestic violence, and those that happens externally are termed non-domestic violence. Okay, so let's take on the first type or the first form of violence. Abuse is a common type of violence and mostly against children and women. All right. What is abuse? It is a wrong and proper use of another person. Example: child abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. It is not necessarily the flogging of somebody or the beating of somebody as it is in this image. Abuse covers these forms: child abuse, using the child against his or her will, overloading the child, sexually abusing a child or an adult, emotional abuse. Okay, emotional abuse in most cases are not really taken seriously, but then it can trigger other higher or capital crimes. All right, when someone is emotionally unstable, that person might be driven to commit other serious crimes. All right, let's take on the next one, which is assault and battery. Assault and battery. Now, these are two types of violent crimes that looks related. Now, what is assault? Assault is the unlawful attack aimed at causing bodily injury to any or to another party or person. It can be aggravated or sexual. All right. Whereas battery is illegal beating that may lead to injuring another person. All right. This is battery is illegal, and of course assault as well is illegal. That's unlawful. They are closely related. You can use either of them interchangeably. All right, let's look at this one, homicide. Homicide is something we need to now differentiate from murder. It is simply the killing of another person, right? The killing of another person. The only thing here is that it may not be premeditated, all right? It may not be premeditated. It might be accidental. It might be a form of self-defense, okay? Self-defense. For instance, soldiers in the battlefield commit a lot of homicide. All right, they kill their enemies, but then they are not found guilty in court. All right, so homicide it may not constitute a crime, but then it is a violent act. All right. On the other hand, murder, which is a type of a violent crime, it is a serious type of violent crime. It's a serious offense. Killing another person with premeditated malice. All right, this is planned. It is a planned act. It has been nursed for some time before the killing actually happened. This is a serious type of violent crime. Okay. How about rape? Let's just take one more. Rape is a common one. It's an unlawful act of engaging another person in sexual intercourse through the use of physical force. As you can see, this application of force right there is evident. And ladies down there, in our society, it is generally believed that rape is always against the women, against the ladies. All right. So, and even the ladies have taken advantage of that to raise false alarm, usually where there is no rape case. And of course, the guys, I can tell you that most times, even the guys are drugged and raped by the ladies, but then that usually goes unreported. Unreported. Okay. Well, these are actually rape is a serious violent crime. All right. Uh, the forceful penetration of another without the consent of that person. It is a serious crime. Okay. All right. Let's now take our class activity 2 before we wrap up this lesson. Now, class activity 2 is bordered on the second aspect of the topic. You should define the term violence. Okay. You should scholarly justify the use of violence by individuals. We have mentioned that. Remember, self-harm and the rest. Critically analyze the concept of violent crimes. In other words, what is violent crimes? State and explain at least 5 types of violent crimes. So let me pause the video for you to take down these questions and attempt them on your own. Alright, so we have now finally come to the end of this lesson. Thanks for watching till the end and paying attention. Thanks for your attention. I will see you again in the next class. Bye for now.